Welcome back to Simplifying the State. I'm Adam Watson.
And I'm Nicholas Parrott.
Okay, Nicholas, what do you think the Opium Wars, TikTok, and tariffs all have in common?
Do they all have to do with China?
They do, and that's what's going to be the topic of today's episode, Sino-U.S. relations, Sino being another word for China. Okay, so Nicholas, you want to give us a brief rundown of Sino-U.S. relations?
Yes, I can do that. Starting off, formal relations between the United States and China began with the Treaty of Wanghia in 1844. This treaty greatly favored the United States in many ways, namely economically and culturally, by giving the U.S. de facto ownership over 5 Chinese ports and allowing foreigners to learn Mandarin previously outlawed in China. Until the collapse of the Qing dynasty, the relationship between the two countries was poor due to xenophobic laws in the United States, economic exploitation of China by the United States, and the difference in ideology. This changed after the collapse of the dynasty and the formation and destruction of the Republic of China and the breaking out of the Chinese Civil War. The communist faction, known as the CCP, beat the capitalist faction, and the capitalists fled to Taiwan. The United States saw this apparent shift in ideology in China, felt it a betrayal, and continued treating the capitalist faction in Taiwan as the true China until the Nixon administration in 1971 recognized the CCP as the true rulers of China. The United States never stopped supporting the capitalists, however, which harmed relations with the CCP. But because of the dictatorial nature of Taiwan until 1996, feelings toward Taiwan diminished with the civilian population in the United States until then, which also led to the Nixon recognition of the CCP as true rulers of China. The Chinese economy began to soar under the economic reforms of Deng Xiaoping and became the United States' biggest trading partner, which has greatly improved relations. But with the rise of Xi Jinping, a more dictatorial and Maoist leader of China, the United States has been eyeing China very carefully for the past few decades. Now, Adam, how does that connect to today?
Yeah, I'll talk about that in a second, but I had a couple questions. The first one was, what brought about that treaty that you talked about? Was it the end of the Opium War?
The Treaty of Wanxia was signed because China was struggling to stem the opium trade that was currently being imposed on them.
Mm-hmm.
And it was also because the United States and China had no previous diplomatic relations earlier. It was to begin those and trade between the two nations, which the United States highly desired. And the U.S. also put pressure on them via diplomatic means, because they had leverage over some European nations as well as China.
Okay, got it. Right. So yeah, I'm going to talk about how this kind of relates to today. China is slated to become the most likely adversary for the U.S. in a potential war. It is already one of our largest economic competitors, although it is one of our largest trading partners. It's also our largest competitor. It has been ramping up military spending in recent years, as well as ramping up tensions with neighboring nations like the Philippines and Vietnam over territorial expansion, such as its Nine-Dash Line, which is basically China redrew the maritime border to include more of the water surrounding it, and then also more islands in the Pacific to try to expand their territory. Not to mention the issue with Taiwan, since China views the nation as a breakaway province of China and not an actual country. This has always been a source of contention for any Western nation who wants to do business, or any Western company that wants to do business in China. They have to be very careful about the issue of Taiwan. China, and more recently more specifically Xi Jinping, has vowed to reunite the island with the mainland by any means necessary, not ruling out military force, which could pose an issue, as the United States has relatively good relations with Taiwan, since both of them are democratic nations, and its strategic value is very important because of its position in the first island chain, which is basically the U.S.'s way of containing China. So the First Island Chain is basically a coalition of nations which the U.S. has built alliances with: Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines, to try to contain China and its aggression. But a war with China would be very bad, as Taiwan is the largest producer of microchips in the world, which are crucial for many things in the U.S., such as weapons, cars. Basically, any smart tech uses a microchip, which is why it would be so bad that if a war were to happen. Given its strategic value, the U.S. has been somewhat ambiguous, though, about what it would do for the defense of Taiwan. With the Taiwan Relations Act saying, quote, the United States will make available to Taiwan such defense articles and defense services in such quantity as may be necessary to enable Taiwan to maintain a self-sufficient defense capability, and shall maintain the capacity of the United States to resist any resort to force or other forms of coercion that would jeopardize the security or social or economic system of the people of Taiwan. The U.S. has pursued a position of strategic ambiguity with Taiwan, both in order to deter a Chinese invasion by not specifically spelling out what they would do, but also not taking U.S. intervention off the table.
Can you go into more detail about the nine dashed line and its implications?
The Nine Dash Line is basically a Chinese attempt to expand their territory. They redrew the maritime border to include islands that are owned by the Philippines, Vietnam, it includes Taiwan, and so then just claiming that it is their territory, and they've been really acting as if everything within the Nine Dash Line is their territory. They've been building up artificial islands for military bases and rocket launch sites, and just basically ramping up tension within the whole uh, Indo-Pacific area. All right, thank you for listening to this episode of Simplifying the State. We'll be back next week with our next topic, so tune in then. See you next time.